Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, September 8th. We're 2020. We're two laypersons, a pastor and an academician, gather for about 55 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is September 13th. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year A, and we hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. We work independently in advance of the call-in with some preliminary information on what the leadoff person would like to discuss, and then we develop perspectives, share, encourage, and challenge each other. And the leadoff person creates a rotation of questions and answers, and Charles Willard's role is to play cleanup, usually at the end of the call, but Charles is welcome to join in anytime he wants to steer or raise questions. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Sara Mickelson.
Bill Hall.
Charles Willard.
And I'm Don Upton. And Sara Mickelson is our lead off today. Hello, my friend. How are you doing?
Good. How's everybody? We're reading again from Matthew. We're still in chapter 18, roughly. We're looking at verses 21 through 35. Last week we talked about how do we respond to each other. Peter posed the question of what do we do when somebody offends us, and how should we handle that? Well, now we're going to go a little bit deeper into that conversation that Jesus and Peter are having about relationships and community, and how do we work with each other in times of tension or conflict. So picking up in verse 21, then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. And when he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, the Lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, have patience with me, I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, pay me what you owe. And then this fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me and I will pay you. But he refused. And then he went and threw him into prison until he could pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed. And they went and reported to their Lord all that had taken place. And then his Lord summoned him and said to him, you wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And then in anger, his Lord handed him over to be tortured until he could pay the entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother and sister from your heart. And that ends the reading of this very controversial scripture. Wow. So I think before we launch into anything, I want to hear from Charles. Charles, I'm sure you have a conversation about this. What are your thoughts about this particular passage?
Thank you, Sarah. I think I'm going to reserve those thoughts until the end. We had a conversation, a pre-discussion, and based upon the direction that took, I think the comments would be better at the end than at this point.
Okay. So here are the 3 questions that emerged from my thinking this week. Why do we perceive or want forgiveness to have a limit? And how might that be entangled with power? My second question, does God see any person or act as unforgivable? And what does that define for us about the Savior we follow? My third question, it's hard work to forgive continually. Where do you experience the most friction in your spiritual practice? Or where might you be actively experiencing a season of Jubilee? Those are my three questions. I'm going to go back to number one. Why do we perceive or want forgiveness to have a limit? And how might that be entangled with power? Bill, do you want to start us off?
I will. Thank you. This is a challenging passage. When I got your question, Sarah, of course, I'd already done some thinking. And this first question was spot on with what I was thinking about. Especially, I liked your adding, and might that be entangled with power? So you motivated me to do something I've wanted to do for a long time. And what I'm about to report is just my research. I'm sure with even more work, I might modify it a bit. But I took the New Revised Standard Version and found every instance where in English in the New Testament, some form of the word forgive is used. Okay. And I found 58 instances. And there are three different verbs. And I think the one that is used almost all the time is all about power. The Greek word is aphiemi, and it literally means to send something away, to let go, to release, to give up a debt, and to forgive. There are several other words. Another one also means to set free, to acquit a prisoner, to release a debtor, to divorce. And the third one that's used, based on my research, only in Paul's writing, is the Greek word charis. It's the noun, the verbal form. So it means to be gracious, kind, giving favor. For example, the famous quote in Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ has forgiven you. I could understand looking back in retrospect, why Paul would use charisomai, because the very verb has to do with kindness and as he says, tender-hearted. As I say, most of the vast majority of the instances is that first verb, which literally means, I visualize it as you've got your fist clenched, grabbing something, and you open your fist and let it go. It's that kind of a powerful word. It's really an action word. Now, there are feelings involved with any actions, but I find that really compelling. In other words, this is a very strong verb. It's definitive. I don't think it has so much to do with releasing the person as releasing what I hold within myself about what that person did. If they hurt me, I release that hurt. I make a choice to forgive, yes, and there are feelings of that, but I am choosing to let go of whatever is around whatever they have done. Again, having looked at some of the scholars' words on this verb, there's consistency about how strong a verb it is and that it is an action verb. So in that sense, it has to do with power. Now, I do think it is our human nature to want to hold on to anger, resentment, because there is a sense of power in that. At least within my own head. If I won't forgive you, Sarah, I'm holding you captive within myself. Now, you may not see yourself that way. Hopefully you wouldn't. But anyway, I've made the point about the power of this verb, and I think it has exactly to do with power and our use of it. It reminds me, Sara, for me, the companion word to forgive is the verb repent. And I'm sure we've said this, you've heard preachers and others say, the New Testament word repent is an action word. Again, there may be feelings with it, but it means to stop the going in the direction you're going and to go in a different direction, to change where you're going, how you're living your life. It's, again, a powerful action word. I think it's clear that forgiving in this biblical sense of the word is very difficult, but very important. We all know the story of South Africa. Bishop Tutu was involved in the so-called reconciliation commissions. He wrote a book, No Future Without Forgiveness. He acknowledges himself the reconciliation process was not perfect. It allowed people to acknowledge their crime or their sin, and actually on both sides of that, white and black. And if they followed that process, they were not sent to prison. And I think that title sums it up. There's a future without forgiveness, but it is dark and very dark. And we live in a dark time. So I'll stop with that, Sara. I thank you for reminding us that forgiveness has to do with power. We have the power to release or the power to hold on. Thank you.
Don, do you have any thoughts?
I do. I think the future with forgiveness on earth is dark too. And I think this is filled with, I think the story is no one is released. There is no release in this story. The forgiveness is conditional. And I love the question too. I really appreciate it. I would have struggled to get to this morning discussion if not for your question. Why do we want forgiveness to have a limit? And I wrote down in my book when I was taking notes, I put brackets around the word forgiveness to also have it read, why do we want to have a limit? And that's what we want. We want to put, that's where the power comes in. We want a limit. And the more the forgiveness is played with and conditionalized, the darker the situation gets. To me, the point of chaos, I think, is a story of absolute chaos on earth. And I think it's not meant to take us to a dark place. It's meant to give us perspective about what forgiveness and conditional forgiveness looks like and how it creates all these tough power structures. So I think if you were moderating a class on this, maybe an opening question would be Sara's question. Why do we want forgiveness to have a limit? And I think everybody would have an answer, and it would probably come in some categories. The first is, well, I want to limit it for personal reasons. Obviously, it needs to have a limit because there's only so much trauma I can put up with. There's only so much pain I can put up with. I think get those honest answers from people. There's only so much harm I can put up with. This is risk management. This is trauma management. Come on. And I think that's something that's in the heart of most people. I'm admitting it. The second one is there's an external view of it personally, which is, well, don't I have a responsibility to create a civil society? That if I let things run amok, and if I don't have conditional forgiveness or an end to forgiveness, then I'm not doing my job in my community. That I've got to create some sense of order in this civil community or in this religious community. Isn't that my job? So that's the second one. And the third one is we need to work together to create that sense of order, to create a code or some kind of order, some propriety in what we're doing, which means we create laws and codes about what we're supposed to do. So I think there's the personal sense of order, and the rules, the culture, the law that we have. Can you put those together in this story? Chaos, violence, destabilization, forgiveness on those conditions, those human conditions, escalates the problem. I don't mean the forgiveness of love, the love of Christ, the the grace of Christ. I mean, our forgiveness, our conditional forgiveness seems to escalate this. And I wouldn't even, Sarah, substitute the why do we want to have a limit. I think we go right to the how. How do we want a limit? How do we do that together? I don't want anybody to enforce this. I want a third party to collect my debt. I don't want to be on my own. I want to have a collective rule, a code, a behavior, a culture, a role of conduct that allows us to enforce this conditional forgiveness. And at the end of this, is forgiveness even available at all? And when this is over, I'm looking at it going, wait a minute. Not only is forgiveness escalate the problem, I mean, the human forgiveness rules, right? It makes it worse and worse to the point of torture and violence. But what about, isn't it really just a scorecard? Aren't we substituting that on the how we do it? So I would go, is Jesus all through his life, with the people he encounters, think of all the stories, roll that up here. Is he tolerated or forgiven? Isn't there a kind of a conditional forgiveness? Is it forgiveness at all that allows him to live, that allows him not to be thrown off a cliff, that allows him not to be taken prisoner and killed like his cousin John? What is that? It's only so far. There's a scorecard. He's gone so far. Stop, and the chaos ensues. I'm going to follow up on the second question, but I think it's helpful to take it to that dark point, Sarah.
So I spent some time thinking about the human process of forgiveness, or the idea of, do we really forgive the people that do harm to us? And I know we're not talking about a perspective that's humanity in its entirety. We're talking about the specific question from Peter is, if another member of the church sins against me. So it's okay, a member of somebody in our close community sins against me. How many times? And John on the Followers of the Way, yesterday's podcast, lifted up how this is rooted in previous stories from Genesis. This number of 7 times and even 77 times. So it's this interesting idea that, are we talking about forbearance? Are we talking about forgiveness? I can forbear a certain number of days with people I don't get along with. I don't know that I can forgive. And I think that's the other treatment here, is that here's the best humanity can do, but here's what God can do. And I think one of the things I struggle with, and I wonder if other people do too, is that tension is a difficult thing to live with. And to live with it on a continual basis is tiresome. It's a moment. It's like having a splinter in your thumb that you are continually reminded that pain is there until you figure out how to remove it. And I wonder, I hear language used from the recovery community where it talks about you're letting that person have, or giving them rent-free space in your head, that you've allowed them to move in and you're not even charging them rent. And I thought that was really an interesting turn of what does it look like when we hold on to an anger or a hurt or a slight or or even an intentional offense. And isn't it very human to want to hold on to that pain and then re-inflict it? And like, my rock is bigger than your rock, so I'm going to win. And you can translate that rock into whatever weapon you want. So I think about this, I can hold you off. I can make you my enemy, and I can hold you off by holding my rock higher, or holding a bigger rock, or holding a more lethal rock. And I'm wondering, how do we undo this? And Jesus steps into this story and reminds us that there's something else at play here. And so I'm kind of scratching the surface of that, but that was one of the thoughts I had, was how very human it is for us to want to exact our own pound of flesh, to quote Shakespeare and The Merchant of Venice. I'm due it. It's mine. I should have it. Give me my pound of flesh. And yet the wisdom offers us the idea that you can have your pound of flesh, you just can't have any bone or muscle or blood with it. So we have to figure out how to extract that pound of flesh in a non-lethal way. And I think we spend a lot of energy creating laws and holding each other accountable with those laws, almost making the law more important than the relationship. And I think that's what bites. That's what bites us on a regular basis, is that we are indicted, that we should be able to come to an accord. And we have to use laws to prevent people from hurting each other, because we've been unlawful in the past. Charles, you want to weigh in?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you, because I think what you have to say is valuable. My second question: does God see any person or act as unforgivable? And what does that define for us about the Savior we follow? Don, you want to take first crack?
Sure. Just a quick comment on what you just brought into the discussion. The first is, I'm taking it, we're taking to a very large scale. For me, I'm going to chaos, that this creates chaos, the power. But if I were doing this in a little scene or a play, when this question is asked, I'd have Peter going, I got another question for you, teacher. If somebody, keeps at it, you know what I'm saying? How long must this go on? And I would have him pointing at the beloved disciple, like, you know what I'm talking about? If somebody keeps, I would do something light to take it to the really dark side, but I picture him actually pointing at somebody. You know what I'm talking about? This guy over here. And then you mentioned the laws, and there's a bright side to the laws, and I think the gospel's in it. I think there's a touch of the gospel, and when you're looking at the history of fair lending and debt collection laws, that we enforce it so we don't hurt each other. But I think there's gospel in there as well, which is, if you look at the history of that just in the law in America and our common law, you'll see the strand of because it creates disruption. We need clarity because this destroys people. It takes them over. It gives them hopelessness. We're dealing with that today in terms of college loans, right? Young, vibrant people are absolutely overwhelmed when they're young. And so we're trying to come up with laws that say, how do we liberate them to be in community and to grow and to prosper? So the question is, does God see any person act as unforgivable? My answer, Sarah, is it's a yes, but answer. And I love the question. You bring it up in a class, I would ask anybody who's raising this question to be patient with each other. You may not like the answer, because I'm going to say, you may not like my answer. It's yes, but. Yes. My answer is yes. But because of love, there's another way. There's a better way, a more excellent way. And what I want to highlight is the chaos of the story to show that there's an alternative. If you forgive a debt, how can you collect or revive a debt? So here's where everything's falling apart. I'm focused on the king. What is that? Even in today's laws, even in the laws of those days, is it forgiven or not? Is there forbearance or not? Is it forgiven? Apparently not. What is this fiat that's taking place here? Is he conjuring the debt back into being? Is there a new violation which he quantifies to be the exact same debt was owed in the first place? Is there forgiveness at all? Think about it. You owed X amount on the car that you're buying, and you paid it off, and you get the title to your car, and you call back and go, you criticize the call rep, and the owner of the bank finds out about it and goes, well, you were rude to the call rep. You now owe everything that you owed before on the automobile. What kind of fiat is this? And I think it demonstrates the kind of power you're talking about and the chaos that takes place when we try to manage forgiveness to what we view as the public order. So is there relief in this story? No. Was he free and clear? Despite his behavior, was he free and clear or not? No. Was he washed clean? No. Wasn't possible. So, he pitied him, he forgave him, forgave the debt, turn around, it's back. I know there were behaviors, but what took place in the fiat is, wait a minute, you don't have clean hands after all. My aspiration for society through my action, says the king, is what I was trying to get across to you. You didn't get it. Now I'm going to go back to the debt again and be even more harmful to you and your family. Oh, you mock my pity? I renew the debt. What a world. What a world we're living in. He behaved as if it were unconditional. No, not at all. Not in this world. And I think it's meant to be a counterpoint, the counter-truth of on this earth. If we take ownership over the order and how debt is forgiven and what we're trying to go towards in our own minds, it's just going to create more chaos. So my answer to your question is, does God see any person act as unforgivable? Yes, but love. That's my best shot.
Wow. Thank you, Don. Bill, you got anything?
By way of introduction, listening reminds me when I was growing up, I think one of the blessings of my spiritual journey was that my pastors, who were, until I went off to college, all retired part-time ministers, consistently with this kind of thing, they reminded us of the method of hyperbole. When Jesus said, if your eye offends you, cut it out, does anybody really believe Jesus meant that literally? Or if your hand offends you, cut it off? And when this passage was preached on, consistently the pastor said, it's not just 77. It's really a symbol for there's no limit to forgiveness. I think this story, parable, is a powerful example of exaggeration at every level. Bruner makes the point that it would be humanly impossible to pay off the debt. He believes the debt could be equivalent even to billions of dollars in today's world. So to me, the whole story is exaggerated to make a point. Now, to your questions, does God see any person as unforgivable? My quick answer is no, God does not see, or to put it positively, everyone is forgivable. Now, I'm going to make what may be an exaggerated statement. I don't think God is the point of this story at all. I think the point of this story is us. I think that's what it's all about. In the upper room, Jesus offered bread and wine to Judas. Judas chose to leave and go and betray. Jesus alerted Peter of Peter's capacity for whatever you want to call it, hypocrisy or bravado. And I was in a class once and they said, what if Judas had not killed himself, as is recorded, two different stories of it, and he'd come back to Jesus and ask for forgiveness? And my answer is, what did Jesus do with Peter at the seashore, as recorded in John 21? But it's interesting to me how Jesus forgave Peter. The word forgiveness never appears in the 21st chapter of John, unless I'm missing something. But forgiveness is the whole theme of that. And how Jesus, and this goes back to the first question, Sarah, and power, how does Jesus communicate forgiveness to Peter? Get back to work, buddy. Feed, tend, care for my sheep. I think that is a powerful example of forgiveness. It's action-oriented. How do you know that I forgive you? I'm entrusting to you and to others my work. Now, one article I read quoted someone who said, every man or woman should have a fair-sized cemetery in which to bury the faults of their friends. And I think that's the point of this. It's, will I bury the faults of others? And I would even say myself. A whole other subject is, I think one of the most difficult kinds of forgiveness is to forgive myself. That's certainly true for me, and it was true for many people that I work with in my ministry. But again, we'll get back to this. And Bruner, Frederick Dale Bruner, who has a 2-volume commentary on Matthew, says at one point, this parable teaches the responsibility of the forgiven. That's what prompts my belief that the issue is us. The point of this story is, if I am forgiven, how dare I not forgive others? And Don, I think I'm understanding and appreciating your concern. I think that note at the end about the king is not saying God is going to take back God's forgiveness. I think it's saying that my not forgiving is that crucial. It's as if I am nullifying my own forgiveness. Now, I realize we can argue that point, but that's at least how I take it.
I'm struck by you just planted a really wonderful thought in my head. The idea that holding someone's debt to you is like a seed for hatred. And letting it sustain itself, or, if you will, fester and rot, which are my favorite phrases for things like this. Fester, fester, rot, rot, rot. You hold on to that, and it lets rot take hold in your own spirit, and you end up losing ground because you can't overcome or let go, release, or to set free that idea of harm that's been done. And I'm struck by that because I know seeds over time can crack rocks. So you might have the faith of someone like Peter, but if you can't let go of the thing, whether it's something you've done or something that has been done to you, it will invade your soul and cast a shadow on the spirit that you do have. That's rather frightening to me, because I think I want to keep score. And I'm reminded in Corinthians that love keeps no record of wrongdoing. And that if I really intentionally strive to love my neighbor as myself, I won't be keeping a tally chart of the number of times that I've been offended, hurt, or the times that I have offended and hurt. So the idea that the chalkboard remains clean, the tally chart remains clean, or the Etch-a-Sketch has been shaken and we're no longer keeping score. If we're no longer keeping score, how do I differentiate that I'm better than everybody else? There's something there. If we're no longer keeping score, how do I know that you're going to fail? Because you failed before. If we're no longer keeping score, why do I expect you to take the same stance in the argument, the same posture in the display of affection or lack thereof? So it keeps no record of wrongdoing. If we are serious about pursuing Jesus and his teaching, how do we manage to so successfully keep score? So I wonder about looking at how God forgives and seeing how woefully, terribly bad I am at it. I think there's something there that I would prefer to keep my tally chart, my little private tally chart, the little thing I scribble in that keeps track of the wrongdoings that I do and that others do. So I agree with Don. to some extent, I believe that love takes that tally chart and throws it out the window. I ponder the idea that God can see any person as unforgivable when I have seen the immense harm that certain individuals in the history of our world have done. And I ponder, is God that big that he could forget that many debts? If you're considering an individual like Pol Pot or Hitler or Stalin or Mussolini or even the United States, does God have that big a heart? Do you realize how much evil has been done? And God can shake the Etch-a-Sketch and go, yep, go out tomorrow and don't do it again. And I ponder that because it's bigger than me. I can't fathom that. So I think there's something about this story that sets that up and says humanity is not able all by themselves to let go of these things. It's the act of God to make that occur. So, Charles, you got anything for me?
Yeah, we don't actually want to think that, I don't think. I thought about this, and the original debtor, the one that owed this huge debt that was forgiven, when we read the story as it's set out in Matthew, we are surprised because the king was surprised and the bystanders were surprised that the person who was forgiven his original debt saw no connection between what had just happened to him and what he was doing to the other person as described in the story. And when we read that story, we ask ourselves, well, how could he possibly not see that connection? But in fact, we don't see that connection all the time. We hardly ever see that connection. I was thinking about just becoming even more depressed. I thought about, well, how many times would God have to forgive me for all of the wrongs that I've done? And it's not 7 times 70. It's an unquantifiable number. It goes on and on and on. But we never make the connection because we don't actually absorb that forgiveness. We don't actually recognize the extent of our failure to perform in the way that God created us and invited us to be. And I think the purpose of the parable is to set a new stage, to provide a window into the life that Christians and believers and those who are invited, that is everybody, to be able to be in a context in which these acts of forgiveness would occur naturally. And it's because we don't live in that world, and we really don't think about that world, and I'm not sure we can think about that world because in some ways it's unimaginable.
Right.
And so I can't think how we would actually come to sense that. A, that we are that bad, and B, that if we are that bad, bad is using a loaded term. If we are that out of sync with the creature that God brought into being in Genesis, then how can we make it right? And the only way that we can make it right is to recognize that there's a Father, there's a Creator who is prepared to forgive. And once that happens, then the debtor who was forgiven, I guess I'm saying it for him at that point, or it could have been, it wouldn't have been her, but him, it didn't take. I mean, the forgiveness was rendered null and void by his own action. It was his own action that undid him, not something that somebody else did, not something that the Lord invoked. It was his own action that, threw him back into where he had been in this parabolic way.
I'm reminded that Adam and Eve hid from God. God still came to the garden, but after eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they're the ones that hid from God. And I'm thinking about that in light of this. So my third question is, it's hard work to forgive continually. Where do you experience the most friction in your spiritual practice? Or where might you be actively experiencing a season of Jubilee? Leveraging that idea of returning to, if you will, Eden, that sense of Jubilee. Anybody want to volunteer for this one?
I'll jump in briefly and share a couple of insights that have been helpful to me over the years. First of all, I'll springboard back to your reference in the recovery community about letting somebody live rent-free in your house. My paraphrase of that is, you are the prisoner of the person you will not forgive. I believe that. I am locking myself up. Back to the verb about releasing and letting go. And something else, I think I alluded a few minutes ago to the difficulty of self-forgiveness. What I have come to accept is that I can forgive somebody and something will trigger that memory and I snap back to it. And I used to fuss at myself for doing that. In the contemplative prayer movement, the counsel is, if you find yourself distracted, don't fuss at yourself. Just bring yourself back to the experience. And so that's a part of my spiritual discipline, Sarah, that I no longer guilt myself if something triggers that. I choose again to feel the pain and then to release it. And another insight that's helpful to me is that forgiveness is not condoning. To forgive you does not in any sense, if what you did didn't matter, then you don't need to be forgiven. Jesus, after the resurrection, Jesus, the Son of God, after the resurrection, bore the scars in his hand and his side. Even the resurrected Jesus had the consequences of his crucifixion, and the consequences are there. The other thing is, I found this in an article by a woman biblical scholar who, writing on this passage, says, there is nothing in this passage that suggests forgiveness is equal to allowing for perpetual cycles of abuse. It is not unforgiving to say, you're not going to abuse me anymore, and if need be, I'm going to get myself out of your life. Now, you hear my energy because as a pastor, I've dealt scores of times with abuse, typically male on female, occasionally the other way. And I said that people would say, well, if I'm a Christian, shouldn't I forgive? And okay, you get the point. Those are insights that's helped me. Now, to recognizing the time and to end on a very high scholarly Presbyterian note, I'm going to quote the lyrics from a country music song by Garth Brooks entitled, We Bury the Hatchet. We bury the hatchet but leave the handle sticking out. We're always digging up things we should forget about. When it comes to forgetting, baby, there ain't no doubt. We bury the hatchet but we leave the handle sticking out. It is difficult. It is tempting to leave the handle sticking out. But when I do, there is a joy in releasing myself and others. Thank you.
I was reminded of that idea that we're going to extend our hand to someone and shake their hand. And that whole idea came from the idea that I'm not going to hold a rock in that hand. I'm going to show you I have no rock in my hand, and I'm going to extend it to you. I'm reminded of those two neighbors that build the rock fence between their property in an effort to say, keep what is yours on that side. I'll keep what is mine on my side. And the rock fence will be our border. I think that we are definitely not God in this matter. And that we still have such opportunity to work toward each other in love, and that's really the hardest part. For me, it's like the continual, well, am I going to let that go? Am I going to let that go? Or am I going to go, that's not right? Or am I going to let that go? And I like the phrase water off a duck's back a lot. And picking which fight you're going to get into. What is it, right? That you pick your battles? I mean, I'm thinking about all the catchphrases we use to describe our inability to forgive. And I wonder about that. How do we bandage each other's wounds when we continue to want to poke salt into them or poke them yet? So, Don, do you have any thoughts about this question?
Well, yeah, and I had just two quick follow-ups to some comments Bill made. The first one is I'm paraphrasing John Debevoise, the senior pastor at Palmacia Presbyterian Church, who preached on this years ago, and he said that don't confuse, and again I'm paraphrasing, something like don't confuse forgiveness with justice. Forgiveness is not justice, but it makes justice possible. The other follow-up I had is I agree with you, Bill, on the scale of this. You're using in terms of billions and billions of dollars, the scale of the debt. But I think we can have it two ways, which is that scale actually is present in the world in terms of incarceration for life, especially when it comes to liberty, which this is about loss of liberty as well. He's confined and he's tortured. So I think the loss of liberty for life, what kind of offenses do we feel like we need to control, which has created this extreme incarceration that we have in the United States right now. I'd say human trafficking would be at that scale. And then on a smaller level, but still the same, student debt, which is not even dischargeable in bankruptcy, if I understand it, right? I mean, it just is what it is. You're 18, 20, 23, 24 years old. That isn't going to go away. So I think you can have it both ways. It can be overwhelming in terms of billions of dollars, but I actually think that's real. I think the story is very close to reality, that you can be overwhelmed with that. In terms of your question, Sarah, I think for me personally is I have a hard time seeing the difference between forgiving and things like ignoring, isolating, evicting, and forgetting. I have a hard time marking a difference, and I think this is the challenge. Or what Charles said, the sweet word, absorbing love, absorbing the Spirit, and putting that into what we're doing. If forgiveness is the same as ignoring, isolating, evicting, forgetting, then I'll declare myself, I am the king of forgivers. I'm the best forgiver in the whole world, right? I'm really great at it. I can forget and isolate and evade and do all those things, but I think this is really a meditation on what real forgiveness is, and it ain't those things at all, and I'm not the best forgiver in the world. I need, using Charles's word, to absorb the gospel and reflect on those things, which means I should be able to see what forgiveness looks like. I should be able to see it and understand the impact that it has. Last week we talked about, I was quoting Bill Wolof when he talked about, when we were asking about how do we confront people that have done us wrong, and he said, Jesus is preparing the church for conflict. It will be a world of conflict. And we need to absorb the words of Christ, the grace of Christ, to anticipate. Because when we go out today, we're going to see debt and the challenge of forgiveness. Matthew has something else in mind than this dark world that I was seeing and this chaos is the church knowing that there's conflict and the chaos that not reflecting or absorbing these things, using Charles' word, can lead to. So it's a story about a jumbled up world of wealth and power and empathy, aspirations, regulation, anger, trauma, all in one place. And then it begs to insert love, not to fix the problem in the world, but to insert love. I think our search for order rips us apart. We can't get it right. We're searching for order. I think that's the scorecard. So it's a call for, Charles, a word I'm going to write down and use for years to come. It's a call for absorption. Sarah, and we've got about 6-7 minutes left, Sarah.
Charles, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you. Well, I did have one thought, and that is the closest thing that we have to a Christian community, although it's not called itself that, are communes today. And I haven't kept up with the way they've been working, although I had visited a number a good many years ago, and the son of a very close friend of ours was in a commune for a good many years. They would not describe themselves, I don't think, as Christian, but they certainly function in a way that Christian communities are characterized as functioning in the New Testament.
So this continues to work on me every time we visit it. And it continues to poke me a little bit into going, okay, you ready to put that down? Or are you ready to pick that up? Are you ready to pick it up? How it feels to be completely forgiven. And I was indicted in reading this again the first time, going, when I have been forgiven so much, why do I perpetually want other people to be in debt to me? And I think that's where I am this year. The rub is right there for me.
Thanks. And we're just about out of time. I'm looking at my friends on a Zoom right now for those just listening on podcast. Any hands up on follow-up? Last call? And seeing none. Palmacia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose Street. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. And we commend that to you. We're managing this podcast in the time of pandemic and lockdowns and quarantines. And so we commend that site to you for further discussion of this passage. It tends to be on the lectionary cycle, but also it's a place you can go for worship, sermons, reflections, prayers, and I'll just say from a personal level, great music. So check it out if you haven't been there. And you're always welcome. And we'll see you next time.